Very much for being here. I have the opportunity to talk to you as a group of students and staff that which has not occurred on a regular basis over the last couple of years with reference to budget. So this is a nice way for me to kick off what I think is going to be one of a number of different discussions that must occur with reference to making sure students are aware of what's happening in their lives. I have to tell you a funny story to start with. I've been here 4.5 years, and I guess it was January of this year, somebody politely asked me as the year turned, he said, "How was your year?" And I told him it was great. I had a great year. And he said, "How could you have had a great year after all these budget cuts?" I said, "I didn't mean this year. I meant it was the first year that I got here. The subsequent 3.5 have been dreadful. And they've gotten worse. And we're not probably at a point where we've seen bottom yet." I think one of the things that I really want to say up front is the college has acted responsibly and appropriately with reference to what's happened at the state level and obviously what's happened at the national level in terms of financing our public education. And as a result, we've taken action to respond to the legislative mandates of reducing our funding, reducing our expenses. And I think we've tried quite successfully to keep students from being aware of it, with the exception of tuition. I think the faculty have done a great job of continuing to do what they do in the classroom and almost shielding you from all the other troubles that the college has experienced. That challenge has gotten really tough for them. We're giving them fewer dollars to do the job, less equipment, fewer supplies, less professional development opportunities, and in spite of it, they're still delivering instruction in a way that makes me proud. Last June, we graduated 1,052 students at this college. Either the associate degree, the certificate, high school diploma, or GED. That many people completed its largest graduating class we ever had in what I would believe is the toughest period financially that the college ever experienced. Subsequent to that, however, is even worse here, and you're in it right now. So my job today is to make sure, when I talk to Cindy about the opportunity for me to share with students, it's my job to perhaps tell you a bit about what has happened at the college, how your lives as you connect to the college have been impacted. I can't tell you as well as you already know, obviously, but tell you some of the things that we've done, some of the measures that we've taken to respond to the fiscal crisis that our state is experiencing. And with that in mind, make you more aware of, and perhaps justify to some degree what you may have seen as you come to class and found that it's different than when you were here previously. I got here in October of 2006. Before the first 12 months was up, we had heard there was a possibility that instead of getting additional money from the legislature next year, we would be actually freezing some of the money that we had hoped to spend. That number was about $85,000. I choked and said, how on earth am I going to freeze and tell the faculty not to spend an additional $85,000 across the board? Since that time, that $85,000 is a drop in the bucket as to what we've had to cut. So as a result of that initial bit of information from the legislature, I formed a budget advisory task force made up of a group of faculty and staff and students to make sure that they were aware of what I was facing as an administrator at the institution, and then seek their advice as to how we go about responding to not only that cut, but further cuts. Here are some things that have happened over the past 3 years. Initially out of the box, we realized that we didn't have the money to spend, so we would simply have to spend less money. Makes pretty good sense to me. But if you have faculty and staff that are given budgets and they expect to budget their money over the course of a year, now we're telling them, you've got to do the same job, but you've got to do with fewer dollars over the same period of time. The following things occurred. We basically said we're going to reduce the supplies that you have in your classroom as you deliver the instructional program. And we're probably not going to be able to buy you new equipment. I don't need to tell you what happens when, with the pace of technological change and having several thousand desktop computers on campus, they simply are going to age out. We're not going to be able to provide them with the high performance that you would expect to find in the workplace, and probably not be able to provide you with the software that's keeping pace with the way the industry is going. We've worked real hard to avoid that becoming a serious problem, and I'll talk about it in a minute. We reduced goods and services, which basically said all the money that you need to handle the job, whether it's some sort of special contracts, if you contract out for some instruction or service, cutting supplies, cutting travel for professional development for faculty, staff, and students. All those steps were put into place, perhaps on a percentage level. We cut the budgets by a certain percent, relatively low at one time. And by the way, these cuts basically mean that money's not coming back. So if you're used to operating off of a $50,000 budget as a faculty member, and we cut it down to $45,000, that next year you're going to be at $45,000 unless there's a further cut or more money authorized by the state, which regrettably has not happened. Another important point that we were enlightened to was the reality that we have, over the years, assumed that we turn the lights on, we turn the heat on, we use the water the same way we've always used it. If I told you that the electric bill or the utility bills were in the millions of dollars for the institution over the course of a year, it stands to reason that we ought to try to find a way to make sure that the lights are dimmer or used less often. We don't heat the buildings the same way we used to, and conceivably try to find ways to use less water. Fundamentally, we thought we could save some money that way. Kathy, our Vice President for Budget and Finance, what's a typical monthly bill for our utilities?
They're not monthly, but as a whole, we spend about $1.1 billion. Sewage and water and electric and gas. And we've actually made a substantial improvement just in the last 6 months. By turning off the lights and the computers and the heat and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's about $1.1 million.
So if it was $1.2 million, that's $100,000 a month. Obviously, we thought we could find ways to reduce that, and have successfully done so. The things that we do to normally run the business of the institution, we bring people on short-term contracts, or we hire services, hire some folks, or hire in some folks that help us get some jobs done, or we don't need full-time employees. They were cut substantially as well. Realizing the institution is an important part of the community, we try to stay engaged with the Chambers of Commerce, the Rotaries, the Lions Club, make sure our memberships and our participation in those organizations ultimately come back and benefit you. My staff belong to 5 different Rotary clubs in the community. Why? Because they give us money for scholarships. Make no mistake about it. We go there, we participate for the purpose of making sure that they know that you, as well as other educational entities in the community, have financial needs. And no doubt some of you have benefited by some of those scholarships. The next thing that we did was to look at our academic programs, of which there were about 54 or 55 of them at the time, and say, can we justify offering that many programs of study? There were several programs that we thought were not functioning very well, and by not functioning very well, first and foremost, it doesn't have any graduates. 2, the graduates can't get jobs. Or 3, they can't get a reasonable wage if they got a job. If it wasn't a family-sustaining income that was going to be realized, that program was in jeopardy. Over the past couple of years, we have deleted 6 programs of study at the college that if you looked at a catalog 3.5 years ago, you would have seen in there. We brought faculty and staff in and helped establish the criteria for discontinuing those programs. If you wanted to be operating in Safeway as a floral designer, work in the flower department at Safeway or Albertsons, that preparation is no longer provided here at the college. It simply wasn't justifiable to charge a student $1,000 a quarter and then ask them to go take a minimum wage job at Safeway. So that was an important point. Several people who saw the institution and its programs as a way to get to a job were unfortunately told we're no longer going to be delivering that program. So that's been about 6 programs. An important part of what we do for students as an institution is to make sure that we provide what I call wraparound services, to make sure that a student, while they're in the classroom, that's only part of their academic life. The support they need outside of the classroom, whether it be advisement, counseling, tutoring, other kinds of services, was also in jeopardy, and we have regrettably cut some of those positions and no longer provide the same wide range of wraparound services that I think students need. You'd be surprised, of course, how many students come to us and say, I'm going to drop out of class because I can't pay the bus token anymore. I've got a problem at home, I'm doing great in class, but I've got a spouse that's beating me. I've got sick children I can't deal with anymore. It's our job to try to find ways to help those people get beyond those barriers so they can survive the academic environment. Some of those support services have been cut. Probably also hidden from you very successfully is that this college has laid off 33 people in the past 3 years. 33 people who did nothing wrong. They came to work every day and did their job, but we simply couldn't afford to pay them anymore, and they are no longer here. They are faculty, staff, classified people, and professional personnel, exempt personnel, who help us administer the institution. In addition, those positions, for the most part, not every one of them, but those positions, for the most part, have not been filled yet. So once those salaries go away, we don't get them back. The next thing we did was to look at the programs that we were going to discontinue and see, are people impacted by that? And the answer was yes. And the people that were engaged or hired by us to teach the program were laid off. So not only was the program to go out of the catalog, but the people who were teaching it lost their jobs. By the way, I've been in this business over 40 years, and it's the most difficult thing I've ever done in my career, was to face those people and tell them you've done nothing wrong, but I've got to let you go. If you've ever had to lay people off because they did something wrong, there was cause, it's tough. But it's extremely tough when you look them in the eye and say, thanks for your great service, but I'm going to have to riff you. And regrettably, we may not be finished that yet. We've got another tough couple of years ahead of us. The next thing we did was a number of folks came forward and said, I really want my job, but I'm willing to not work full time anymore. Will you entertain it? If I can find a way to get the job done by working 4 days a week instead of 5, I will accept 4 days worth of pay. We accept it. And for the most part, we've accepted those voluntary reductions in salary, really. And they're not coming back. I mean, once you give up that time, I can't go out and find new money to pay them if they decide, well, I changed my mind, I want to come back to work full time. So we've entertained that. We've also put out voluntary separations from service, where we basically have offered people money so they would discontinue their service at the college, retire early, or to give up their rights for tenure if they were faculty members. And those buyouts came from some reserve money that we had that we could not spend on salaries. We've probably we supported about 15 people, 10 or so 2 years ago and 5 this year. Those positions are gone and saved us salaries. We have only had to replace a couple of those positions. The faculty, staff last year agreed, all 4 unions agreed to take a voluntary pay cut. The voluntary pay cut ultimately wound up being 4 days of shutting the college down. And the people who were working for us at that time said, I agree to give up the pay on those 4 days, which basically amounted to 1.5% of their salary. That technically ends June 30th of this year, and if the budget picture doesn't get any better, we may have to talk about that voluntary break in service as well. In addition to people volunteering to go without pay, we closed the college for 4 days for utility savings. If you can picture the following, we typically and historically have 3 days off at the Thanksgiving period, Thursday, Friday, 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. One of the days we decided to shut the institution down was the Wednesday before. It simply allowed us to turn the power off, turn the heat down, 1 extra day, saving several $1,000s every day you turn the power on. And we are trying to selectively look for those days again this year. There were 4 days of college closure that occurred during the Christmas break, by the way. So many of you didn't even know it, but the institution shut down and we were able to save utilities. All the staff that were working during that period voluntarily took a vacation day during that period. So their salaries may not have been impacted, but the reality is they may not have wanted to take a vacation day in the middle of winter. And the last thing I want to talk about is the task force that I put together. From that emerged a group that we called the Sustainability Task Force. A group of volunteers from the college community to say, how can we come about saving money? And efforts were made on the part of these folks to find ways to look at the things that the college hadn't previously looked at. And that Sustainability Task Force ultimately formalized a number of the utility savings that Vice President Yost just referred to a minute ago. I probably could stand here for a lot longer talking about various specifics of what we've done, but I really wanted to just mention to you as a group, as a way of getting the information to students in particular, what measures have been taken to deal with the catastrophic loss in funding at the institution over the past several years. Catastrophic may sound a bit dramatic, but the reality is during this period that the money was cut, our enrollment rose at a considerable rate, on the order of 16–17% over the last few years. That's 1,200 more students than we typically support in a period where there's fewer dollars. So the institution has been impacted severely. Our job is to try to protect you as students as best we could from feeling that. The reality is you have felt it, as you know, because the state has authorized, the legislature has authorized an increase in tuition for 2 of those the last 2 years. And the message that's coming from the legislature right now that the tuition is going to go up again next year and the year following. The next biennium to the tune of what's probably going to be in the order of 11% each year. For some students, it will be the tipping point. For some students, you're going to say, I can't handle it anymore. Our people in financial aid, the people that are doling out scholarships and emergency funds are being tapped pretty hard. If you ask me what do, I think what's going to happen now is allow you to hear from a couple of other folks to make sure that you get some insight as to what you can do as students, what you need to know as students, how to address some of the issues that impact this institution. I don't want to make it sound like Clover Park's the Lone Ranger. Every publicly funded institution in the state has been impacted by this crisis. There are some entities that are more vulnerable than others. When there's a fiscal crisis, for the most part, K-12 is not impacted. In the United States, we have compulsory education through grade 12. It's pretty tough to say you must go to school, but then we don't fund the schools anymore. So they're pretty much untouched. And there are other sources of funds that they've lost. I don't want to make it sound like they got away cheap. The police force, prisons. Just because you have a funding crisis doesn't mean you close the prisons for a few days. The reality is those expenses go on. Higher education is viewed as discretionary. That way they can come in and cut us just like other social services, and that has been the case. So make sure that when you read the news over the course of the next number of months and as budget issues are there, try to read between the lines a little bit and interpret some of the things that this institution has had to face and realize that others have as well. So I'm going to let the other speakers have the podium, and then I'll be available to answer some questions as you wish. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Aaron Brown, who's an important staff member at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. Ms. Brown is a key player for the state for a couple of reasons. Number one, she coordinates the activities of your trustees, the 5 trustees for each colleges. So I want to make sure that I have a good relationship with all my trustees. She makes sure they're happy as well. So with this, I turn it over to Ms. Erin Brown.
I am not a podium girl. You're gonna have a hard time videotaping me, because I'm gonna move. Good morning.
Good morning.
So thank you for allowing me to come speak to you. I am, as John said, an employee of the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. You probably have no idea what that is. But really the agency I work for serves as sort of the middleman for the legislature where the money and the policy comes from to the colleges. And my role there is twofold. I work with the trustees, and then I also work with our internal legislative process. That's not really why I'm here today. I think I was picked because I work with students quite a bit. I used to work in the student services arena, working with student government groups. And really my passion came from when I was a student myself. And I had a really fantastic faculty member. Her name was Nita Reinhardt. She was at Evergreen. She used to be a state senator. One of the most dynamic women, powerful women in the state senate. And she instilled in me a seed of passion for civics and state government and the want to be involved. I'm curious why you all are here today. Anybody brave enough to say, did somebody tell you you had to be here? Are you worried that you can't afford your tuition next year? Or are you just wondering what the heck is going on, that I can't get my financial aid on time, or the line somewhere is long, or my classes are full? Why are you here? Funding. So funding, concern. How many of you are really frustrated with government in general? It's so complicated, it's impossible to understand. How many of y'all voted in the last election? For those of you that didn't, why did you vote?
I cannot vote.
Did you understand what was on the ballot? Did it make sense to you? I read my ballot, and I work with a lot of the processes through the initiatives. I have to read those things. I have to get to know the legislators, and guess what? When those ballot pamphlets come to my mailbox, they are Greek to me. I look to other smarter people in my office to tell me what they mean. I can't imagine as an average citizen getting those and understanding what to do with it and how it impacts you. But I'm here to tell you why it is important to be involved, because guess what? Every single one of those initiatives on the ballot that failed affected you as a student. And you probably had no idea why. So we've got some really smart people in our office that work really, really hard on your behalf as students. That's part of the reason I'm here. The other reason I'm here is I want you to be passionate as a citizen with an interest as a student as to why it matters to you. How many of you know how much of your education is funded by the state? Taxpayer dollars. Anybody have a guess?
67%.
It's about half. So the other half of your education is paid for by you. That used to not be the case. If you go back about 10, 20 years, the state picked up the majority of the cost for you to attend higher education. Your education was mostly paid for by the state. Your textbooks were cheaper too. And I don't know if you've noticed that through the last few years, why it's so important what Dr. Walstrum was talking about as far as state funding and why it really matters to you is you all are being boiled slowly as students, and you don't even know it. And I think what you'll see is there's been a trend. You hear a lot, I don't know if anybody watches C-SPAN or Fox News or how many talk shows you watch or the government stuff about the deliberations between the Democrats and Republicans and accountability, and we want to know what we're getting for our money. But what people don't realize is that those things that stay constant, the caseload for incarcerated people, we spend like $37,000 a year to keep somebody in jail. We get nothing for it as a
Per
society.
person?
$37,000 a year per person for a year. Those folks don't get out and get jobs. They're not able to support their families. They don't necessarily get the skills they need to go out and be productive citizens. Chances are we may be paying that money every year. How many of you are paying $37,000 a year in tuition right now? Yeah, I didn't think so. We spend more money putting people in jail than we do educating, and that's why it matters to you to get involved. So as a citizen, you are seeing your state funding decreasing and your out-of-pocket expenses increasing. And to me, as a taxpayer, as an ex-student, as probably a potential future student, as somebody who cares about the students in our system, that really makes me angry. Because I know the investment in you is going to give me something back years from now. Because I'm someday going to need Social Security, I need my roads fixed, I have to drive to work. I've got 2 kids that I'm sending to school, they're 7 and 9. I want to know that there's a place for them to go someday. And the fact that my neighbor doesn't necessarily care, because maybe they don't have students in college, about what you all are doing in college bothers me. It's my responsibility as a citizen to understand what's on the ballot, to understand the things that Dr. Walstrum were talking about as far as how funding affects your ability to go to school. You all have a budget, right? How many own houses or pay rent? How many are working at the same time? How many have gotten either lower reductions in your pay or your rent has gone up? You all work within a budget, right? And you know every time that budget gets squeezed, it's 2 less lattes you get to buy a month. You don't get to buy the new whatever, the newest thing, clothes. That's my thing, shoes. Same thing, it goes in higher education. So as the state is cutting money, you're paying more in tuition. The majority of the cost of your college is your instruction. You have the best faculty, you've got one of the best faculty sitting in the room right now that I'm going to work with quite a bit, Phil, but you all are getting less for your money and you're paying more. I'd be frustrated as students. So I'm here to answer some questions about process. How do you get involved? I'm not going to inundate you with some numbers. We've got a great speaker behind me that's going to give you kind of some context in terms of the budget and how that affects you. But I'm curious what questions you have about how the process works. How do you get involved as students? How can you influence legislators? How can you influence the process? Because I guarantee you, you're probably like me 10 years ago and went, I have no idea how to make an impact. First is voting. And not just voting blindly, like, yeah, I like that guy's name, sounds cool, you know. But really actually understanding. How many of you went to like candidate forums this year and actually listened to people that were running for office? That makes me nervous. Those people are making big decisions on your behalf. For those of you that didn't go, why? Because I have the opinion that a lot of people have opinions about their funding being cut, and as students, if you're not involved, I have a hard time feeling sorry for you right now. Does that make sense? It's a really harsh statement to make. But if you're not in control of your future and you're letting somebody else be in control of your future, you're just letting stuff happen to you. And I think in general, I think we've been kind of passive about our involvement in public service, which is why I work where I do. I'm passionate about making change and positive things in your life so you can get where you want to go. Danielle?
Do you know some resources that can help you stay connected to find information or
Yes. In fact, actually, Mike is going to put up some web resources at the end of his presentation, but the question she had was, how do you involve? First of all, y'all are students. It's hard to get involved in the grand political scheme. I will tell you right now that the federal government is just as complicated and as much of a train wreck at the federal level as we are at the statewide level. And every state has a different issue and a different problem. We're all in this together. The best thing as students you can do is go to your president's office, your ASG officers. You have leaders on campus that are working very hard to interpret the changes that are happening in Olympia when the budgets come out, how they affect you. But the most important thing is not to be passive recipients of the information. Have a coordinated effort on campus. Your president is the best place to get that information because he gets all the data, he gets all the impacts, and he knows how it will affect your lives here on this campus as a student. And then get involved. There are a lot of smart people in Olympia. There are a lot of folks like Mike and me and others in our office, and our presidents are down there on a regular basis advocating on behalf of you, but I can tell you one thing. Legislators don't want to hear from us. They see us every day. We get paid to do this. They want to hear from you. They want to know your life story. Why are you in school? Shoot, I need a job. I got laid off. I have 3 kids to feed. I can't pay my rent. I want to work. Those are the stories that our legislators need to hear, and it has impact and they are hungry for them. You have a role to play in shaping everything that happens to you as a student, and they need to hear from you. That's probably the most important thing you can do. Get to know who your local legislators are. I guarantee you there are some legislators that get reelected every year, and I just go, really? And I'm not going to name any of their names. I won't. But I just kind of wonder for those people, how many times people just go, oh yeah, I recognize their name, and they check it. I don't know, could be wrong. Of course, my former boss is now my local legislator. I kept asking her, like, really? You're running? You're crazy. But anyway, do you have another question? And I'm going to pull Mike over here, and then we'll kind of tag team.
I had the privilege of writing to a legislator about the cuts and all that kind of stuff, and her response to me, she wasn't playing. She was real tough, and the gist of it was she said that all the things off the table made education basically the only thing on the table, and like she said that she was justifying the cuts to education. So what's the strategy to attack when they justify? I mean, it made good common sense what she said. I gotta admit that. But
so what she's referring to, there's a big pie of dollars available. How many know how our state funding is collected? You get two major revenue sources, right?
Taxes.
Sales tax, which is every time you buy anything. Now, right now, I can tell you, times are tough. People are not buying as much stuff, so we're not getting that revenue from people shopping. I'm trying. I buy as many shoes as I can possibly buy. I swear. But I cannot do it alone. The other piece is B&O tax. So we get a significant amount of tax from the production of our businesses. But if they're having trouble selling their products because of the recession and nobody's buying anything, that's a revenue source that's also gone down.
what happened to the lottery?
I don't know.
Like,
You can't win if you don't play.
No, ain't that.
And there's lottery funds, but yes, that's another form. The two major forms are your sales tax and your B&O tax. Those are your major revenue streams. Sorry. I've been wanting to win the lottery for years, but I actually don't play very often. I'm not a very good gambler. I don't like losing. So I just sit around and whine about it. But the problem there is you have a pie that's shrinking. So you only have a certain amount of money that comes in, and you have certain things that have to be funded. We have an obligation as a state to pay for K through 12 education. And depending on the caseload of how many kids we have going through school, that money is set. We also have obligations as far as our social and health services. We have poor people that need basic health plans. We have people that need Medicare and wraparound support services. We have folks that have lost their jobs or on welfare. We have obligations outside of just of our education spending. Those are pieces that are set in the budget. Incarcerated adults. Holy cow, we have an obligation to keep people in prison because goodness knows we can't let them go running around. So there are certain things in the budget that just are. And as that pie shrinks, there are only a few pieces of that budget that are left that can be touched. And higher education is one of them. So part of the problem is that you have a pretty strong voice out in the ether of society that says, we don't want to pay more taxes, we pay a lot of taxes. We don't want to pay car tabs, we don't want to raise taxes. We've got Tim Eyman who makes a lot of money making sure that we make it as complicated as possible to raise new revenue. Folks think state government, you can run more efficient. I'm here to tell you realistically, democracy is not efficient. It's just not. You can only shave so much out of a government process that has to be accountable and transparent to the people. It's not a business. There aren't as many loopholes as people think. You all are experiencing what happens when government needs to be more efficient. You have longer lines, you have bigger classes. There's where the efficiencies come from, and guess what? They're detriments. They're not efficient. So when she answers that question, I think the real hard question is, where does the revenue come from? And where does the leadership come from? I look to my legislator to say, hey, you know more than I do because you see the numbers. I want you to have the moral courage as a leader to make a tough decision and come back to your constituents and say, here's the deal. We need to find revenue.
Yeah, I'll check it.
Now the question on the table right now is, with no new revenue coming in, guess where the revenue is to pay for higher education? It's you. So if you think as a taxpayer you're not affected, you are, and you're singled out because you're a student. 20 years ago, that wasn't the feeling. 20 years ago, there was a massive investment in public education. Folks had the moral courage and the values to say, if I put you through school, I know on the other end I'm going to have a more educated, more involved, more civically minded populace. We are not like that anymore. I think we were actually a little more selfish. You know, my offensive comment that I always make is I find it very ironic that the folks that are in decision-making positions right now are the ones that benefited the most from the GI Bill and public investments in education. How ironic it is that they don't have the moral courage to make the same investment in our students now. That pisses me off. So that would be my question back. She had a very good answer for you, and that unfortunately is the realistic truth. But as a legislator, they are looking to their constituents. If they come back and think that they are not going to get reelected or they're going to get hammered for making that tough decision locally in Olympia, they won't do it. They need support. They need to hear from you. They need to know that they can make those decisions and that they'll be supported. They need help.
Do these people not realize that we're spending more money to keep one person in prison a year than what the majority of us or even you're hoping to make when we graduate?
Absolutely.
That's ridiculous. So why aren't we getting the money from there?
Well, they've got to go somewhere. And then the unfortunate truth, I heard a fantastic speaker this weekend. I don't know if any of you are YouTube freaks so that you can get online at some point. Gregory Canada was a speaker at a conference this weekend. He is the one that I got those numbers from. So an investment of $5,000 per student from this group that he works with, from cradle up to college, $5,000 to make sure students can graduate from college, and compared that to the ability of keeping somebody incarcerated. It is not just about investing in higher education. It is about investing in our people throughout their education, but we have shifted away from that. You look at the federal government, look at the things that we are on the hook for there. They're having the same grappling conversations in Washington, D.C. as they are having here.
My thing is, somebody is approving that money to be spent on somebody to be.
They have to. It's just the cost of incarcerating people.
But why?
Well,
somebody's making those prices. Somebody's saying, oh no, I want more money. Somebody's saying, let's do this.
The only other option there is to let them out. And that's unacceptable to us as citizens. If somebody's committed a crime, we have to do the time.
Well, I understand that, but somebody is saying, okay, well, this price is going to keep going up, or we're just going to keep paying for it.
We have to.
I understand that we have to, but somebody is raising those prices.
It's not raising the price, it's just the price that it costs, but you're absolutely right to be pissed off. You're asking the right question.
Your average junior or underage rent home, you know, any of those, it costs about $100 a day just to keep them there. And I should know through it, and it's ridiculous. I'm agreed. And usually it's the parents who have to pay for it. And if you can't, then it's still not free, but it builds on you if you don't pay it. And it's unfortunate.
So my question is, you are raising the right level of passion. Maybe take your question a little further. So when you talk about civics, it is, then where do we make the investments?
Where do we go to say we have an issue? That's not publicly advertised, or at least I haven't got it. It's not something that's taught in our schools. But if we want to be a part of it, then somebody needs to make it known how to actually participate.
I'm hoping that's why you're here. Yes? Is that why you're all here? Is how do you get involved? How do you understand? There are lots of resources. And I will tell you that I have been doing my job for about 11 years. I'll tell you, when I was a student, I was so frustrated because I didn't understand anything about politics. I hadn't studied politics since the 8th grade. How many of you are familiar with the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law, how the budgets are developed? None of us have probably had exposure to that since we were 12 or 13 years old.
I remember the song. I'm just a bill.
There you go. So these are the first steps. There are ways for you to get involved, and I don't think we have the time here today, but as part of my role at the state board, I work with your student government leaders. We do a legislative academy every fall to teach about the legislative process, how to understand how Olympia works, and that mirrors the federal government. There are folks that are willing to come in and teach those things on campuses. I certainly have made myself available if there's ever a time that you want to do that. But it is important for you to understand democracy. We have all forgotten how it really works. We have turned the keys over to other people because we are apathetic, because it's confusing and it's complicated, but it's important. So I'm going to stop there, because otherwise we'll keep talking. So do you have one more question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that this is more of a social issue. If you say 20 years ago that people actually cared and actually did something for education, 20 years ago was when the problem started. And you see how many people here raise their hands. 2 of them that actually went and voted. What's being done to solve the social problem rather than get out and just say people need to vote? We need to actually get into the social issue and just addressing the same problem that people already have.
I'd say encourage yourselves to vote. You all have voter registration drives on campus. As students, you should be asking each other these tough questions every day. You should be asking your family members these questions every day.
Well,
as citizens, we should be requiring.
No one's teaching you in school to go vote. You only learn that this is the way it happens, this is the way it is. Go vote, you make a difference. But when you actually do vote, you learn there is a bunch of difference.
And when you have these felons coming out, they don't have the right to vote. Like myself, I've lost it. I've committed a Class A felony, but I myself would love to be able to vote, be able to change the future, but I have no way to because I've lost that right.
You still have a voice, though.
And my daughter.
Her voice isn't heard.
My daughter is in 10th grade, and she was flat out told in her government class that she can vote all she wants, but us as a people doesn't count. It's only being the people in the Senate and the House that make that final decision.
Yes.
That each individual person does not matter.
Guess what? That's not true.
That's what she was taught in school.
And this is what's frustrating for me.
But if she's taught that, then why should they come out and say, oh no, that's not true? They don't know any better. That's why they go to school, is to learn. And
I think that there is a general feeling of apathy that it doesn't matter. But how many people actually, I'm sorry, the last election, and I'm not going to show my colors either way because I actually vote multiple ways, but I was pretty inspired at the last election. It was the first time I felt something pretty strong about social change in a long time, and the ability for our young people to get involved. It was the first time we had a president candidate that completely infiltrated Facebook. We have a new generation, a new way of doing things, and I think you've got a generation coming up that's really hungry for democracy and to get involved in civics. You all have the responsibility not to be taught it. You all were given this right as an American when you were born. You all can vote. You can have a voice. Even if you can't vote, you can influence other people to vote. That's the beauty of democracy. That's the beauty of civics. It's the beauty of why you're here, because you care. But I will tell you, if only 2 people in this room, as much as you care about what's impacting you every day, and you're not getting involved, what difference are you making? That's where the apathy comes from. It's the passive voice.
I don't mean to quote, HBO or TV specials, but HBO actually a documentary that proves that the voting system, electronic voting systems, can be hacked. What do you say to someone like me who's watched votes change from 1 to 7 to 7 to 1? See Governor Bursch get elected in a landslide turnover where he changed the votes. To someone who sees that there is nothing that they can do. How are you going to prove that there's something that we can actually change?
You can still talk to your legislators. They're human beings.
And
you can write letters, and there will be numbers that Mike will give you that they actually do read their email. There are hotlines that they do tallies about the issues that come in. As students, you can inundate that hotline and say, we care about higher ed funding. And there is a person whose job it is to tally every time a phone call for that comes in. And they give that to the leadership of both the House and the Senate. It does matter every time you pick up the phone. It does matter every time you send an email. Those things really do matter. It's beyond just voting. It's about exercising your right to have a voice. And there are those opportunities. I'm gonna stop. We'll keep going, but I don't want to take the time, but I want to introduce one of my very good friends, Mike Ogate, who works for the Washington Student Association. This association works on behalf of students, both the 2- and 4-year college level in the legislature. Mike is up there every day working very, very hard to make sure that you as students have a voice in the legislative process. So I'm going to introduce Mike, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out today. My name is Mike Ogate. I am the Executive Director for the Washington Student Association, and I believe that education is a right. I think that anyone who has the ability and the aspirations to seek higher education, they should have the opportunity to do so, and it shouldn't matter how much money you make. That shouldn't determine how much you will make in the future or how much your family has. There are 3 things I'd like to do today. Tell you a little bit about our organization and myself, where the current budget conversations are in Olympia and also in DC, and then also how you can affect the outcomes of those budget conversations. So I'll start with, I guess, a little, if you can go to the next slide there. So the Washington Student Association is a membership organization. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan corporation. We're independent from the state. Our board of directors, our students, our executive officers are students, and our lobbyists that we have in Olympia are students. Myself and Megan Brownlee in the back there are the 2 staff members for our organization. Otherwise, we are comprised and represent the collective interests of students. Let's see here if I can. So we were formed to preserve and enhance the quality of education in Washington, represent the collective interests of students, like I said, and serve as a conduit between our campuses across the state. Right now we have membership at 9 campuses, predominantly our four-year institutions. Our main role is sort of on the upper level, if you want to think of student government. So you have your student government here at Clover Park, and Washington Student Association serves as sort of a statewide student government, and then we have affiliation with the United States Student Association, which works in Washington, D.C. on your behalf and on behalf of students across the country. Like I said, we are a membership organization, so it's Clover Park is not currently a member, but I'd be happy to talk more about that later. So a little bit about where things are at. On the federal level, the Pell Grant is really the main form of financial aid for students across the country. It provides between $500 and almost $6,000 in financial aid to students. In the 1970s, this program funded basically the entire cost of the college education for students, and today it's only about 30% of the cost of education. So even though the numbers have gone up in recent years, it's still really far from where it used to be just 20 or 30 years ago. And just in the last couple of years, because of our economic recession, the number of students that have applied and are eligible for the Pell Grant has increased from 6.2 million in 2008 and 9 to a projected 9.2 million in 2011. And this has put a real serious strain on the federal government's ability to serve students. And as a result, there are going to be some reductions to financial aid in order to maintain access and affordability for as many students as possible. If you could go to the next slide. So President Obama has proposed for his fiscal year 2012 budget, so not this current year, but next year, what he is proposing is done to maintain funding for Pell Grant students is to eliminate the Pell Grant for summertime quarters. So there won't be any financial aid available if you want to take summer classes anymore, only your fall, winter, spring quarters. and that will save about $8 billion next year. And the other thing that he's proposed is to remove the subsidies on graduate loans. So for those students seeking a master's degree, they won't be able to have the interest on that loan covered when they're attending school. So just one more thing on the federal level, the House, which is currently controlled by the Republicans, has a little bit different approach. They want to reduce Pell funding down about $825 per student, as well as eliminate the summer quarter funding. So basically, it would really impact students significantly if something like that were to go through. Obviously, there is still a lot of work to be done with the Senate proposing their budget, so it's not really certain where the Pell Grant funding will end up by the end of the year, but it's something that is definitely within the conversations of DC right now. So, Aaron, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on the federal level. Right.
Maybe just as far as advocacy goes, in February I was actually in DC to talk about Pell Grant funding. It was right after the President announced his budget. The House had just announced their budget. The Senate was working on their budget, which is why you're seeing that they are not coming to an agreement. So the two proposals on the table at that time were to either reduce the Pell Grant maximum or to eliminate the summer program. So as we were working with senators, Patty Murray and Maria Campbell when we were there, the general sense from them was that they were working really hard to keep the maximum. So I do have some individual numbers. I think we had about 71,000 students that participated summer. They would be losing that particular proportion, but the worst of two evils, you're either going to get one or the other. So as you are doing your advocacy work in regards to the federal Pell, the message that we have been sending as a system after looking at the numbers and the impact was to say, please maintain the maximum Pell. We can always work on getting the summer Pell back again at a different time. But both the President and the Senate are working really hard to keep that Pell maximum. But there has been some difference in opinion across chambers.
I guess I'm probably confused because I get the Pell Grant. I don't get that.
You don't get that?
That's the maximum. Not everybody gets that.
And not everybody gets the maximum, and some people may qualify, some people may not. So there's a difference between the federal financial aid, which is Pell, and then your state financial aid, which is your state need grant, state work study, other state resources. So depending on your financial aid package, you may get a series of both.
Yeah, they cut me
I
off.
guess part of what I'm finding is you are talking about reducing the summer quarter. Okay, well, from my understanding, the summer is elective. Nobody actually has to take that. So they can, in fact, opt out of that.
No.
But not for ours. Okay, misinformation for me. But the maximum, or at least what I'm getting for the Pell Grant, I'm finding won't even pay for the classes I am taking, and the books alone, let alone help with the outside stuff. So I, in fact, have had to go and take out student loans, which, being a single mother of 4 kids, was the last thing I wanted to do. And that isn't even enough to pay my rent on top of it. So,
Which is why we are fighting so hard to maintain the maximum that we have. We've had to fight over the years to even get it to the level that it is, because it's not kept pace with tuition and books and fees. The summer edition is relatively new. It's only been in place the last couple of years. So that's why I say to you, you want to fight like heck to keep your maximum level maximum, because it has been much lower than that. It's actually gone up in the last couple of years to try to keep pace with inflation. There was federal legislation to try to keep it raising at a certain tick through inflation, but that was defeated last year.
And like I said, the Pell Grant, when it was established in the 1970s, covered the full cost of instruction and has not been able to keep pace as tuition has increased. And that maximum grant is it's based on, one, your financial need and also what type of institution you go to. So a more expensive college, you get more aid to help cover tuition. So there's a formula, a mix of different things that determines how much aid you receive on an annual basis. So if you could go to the work study slide, or sorry, state need grant slide, one back. So our main focus with being a statewide advocacy organization is what happens in Olympia. And the state need grant is sort of the state equivalent to the Pell Grant, and that is funded by Washington State. So our state is the main contributor to that, and it does get mixed in with the Pell Grant on the campus level. So some of the money you may receive comes from Pell, some comes from the state need grant. It currently supports 72,000 students, but just like on the federal level, there has been a real surge in demand for financial aid, and the level of students that have need in our colleges has increased considerably, and a lot of those students are at our community and technical colleges across the state. So while we are serving 72,000 students, 22,000 additional students are now eligible, and there's just not the funding there to provide service to those students. So those are low-income students that aren't having any support, and has obviously watered down the ability to serve those that are getting support.
When you talking about up there, it stated about the main paragraph was 5,500, and that was 5,500 per student, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if the school don't give you all of that, where does that money go?
So like I said, it's right now there are about an estimated 9.2 million students that are going to be eligible and receiving the Pell Grant. So as there are more students, basically if you think about having like there's a bowl of punch back there, the more people that are in the room trying to get out of that same bowl of punch, it's not like the bowl's getting any bigger. And so you have to give everyone a little bit less of a cup. So if you don't get the maximum award, it has to do with, one, your current income level, what the cost of instruction is at the school you're at, and how much money is available in the pot. So those three things kind of factor into.
I just wanted to add to this. It is actually not the college's money. It's the federal government's money. So what we don't use, we don't get to spend elsewhere. It really stays in the coffers of the federal government. So it's very different than the assumption that they give us a bag of money and we will just continue using it and divide it up beyond the need for students. So if there's no more need at this campus, the money goes elsewhere.
So the situation that I'm in right now, and I assume that there's several people, maybe not specifically in this room, but in general, is that being that I'm under 24, my family's financial contribution is still influenced based on the financial aid that I receive or lack thereof, even though I haven't been living with them for 5 years. So I guess my primary concern is, being that I am loan only now, I would love to receive any of this pot of money, but I don't have any of it now. So what do you say? You say you wait till you're 24 just to be able to go back to school and I waste 2 years of my life doing something? Or what do you say to those people that get involved to try and make an impact and at least get some sort of financial aid other than loans?
Well, I would say don't wait for an education. I don't have the statistics here, but I think it's something like 50%. You have a 50% less chance of completing a college degree if you wait 1 year after high school, and it basically goes down from there. 2 years, another 50% less chance of getting a college degree. The problem is that our, like I said, the funding just has not kept up with the cost of tuition and the cost of instruction. In 2008, 75% of students who were dependents who filed tax returns under their parents' name had a family income of about $36,000 for a family of 4. And 77% of those that were individuals that were independent had an income of less than $29,000 a year. So, I mean, those the financial aid isn't reaching up into what is anywhere near what you would consider middle class. It's in just the very lowest income students that are getting the funding. Our state likes to say that we serve up to 70% of what the median family income is, but there isn't enough money there to really actually reach that 70% level.
I'm sorry, I just have one other question. I mean, this is pretty.
You're good on the mic.
Oh. Usually I can say.
I guess this is bringing up another whole question and concern for me. As I said earlier, my daughter's 15. She has already been awarded a scholarship through the government because she has always received straight A's. Of course, she's got another 3 years before she can actually go and use that scholarship. So what, are those funds going to still be there? How do I fight for them? What do I need to do? Because yeah, I'll be out of school for 1 year, but realistically, am I going to be able to pay for her college education by that point? So what's going to happen there?
I do have some information on how you can contact your legislators, and I'll get to that here, maybe you might go to the next slide. I will be getting to that in just a minute. So the other major program that the state funds is state work study. The federal government has a work study program also. Washington actually has the largest state-funded work study program in the country. The last supplemental budget, state work study was reduced by 50%, so about 2,200 jobs for students were lost last year. The governor's proposed budget would eliminate 6,900 jobs, and this weekend the House just proposed a budget that would eliminate all funding for state work study, which would be about 13,000 jobs for students across the state. And a lot of those jobs are right here on campus, so that wouldn't be just an impact to those students in trying to pay for their education. It'd be a real impact to your education and the services you receive, because so many of the offices, so many of the just food services, financial aid office, library, whatever, a lot of those students working in those positions are work study, and the college just doesn't have the funding, especially after all the budget cuts, to be able to maintain those student positions at the current level. So we're not only seeing a reduction to student support, but also to the ability for institutions to provide support to students. This budget, I think this is the most alarming picture of where things are at. So what this is comparing is our 1987-89 operating budget for Washington State, which was $10.7 billion. And of that $10.7 billion, about 16% of it was going to higher education. The green wedge there was four-year colleges, and the orange is our community and technical college system. And then this is the proposed House budget, and I'm sorry, this number is an this is the governor's number here, but the percentages are still the same. Higher education has just been squeezed as a percentage of the budget every year. Even if as state revenues increase, higher education may get a little bit more, but more is raised in tuition. Every year students are asked to pay a little bit more than what the state invests. And in bad times, the state cuts back, students are asked to pay more. So there's never a time for higher education to regain ground as far as a slice of the pie goes. And I mean, it's really just, how do we expect to have a prosperous future when we can only afford to invest 6% of all of the money that the state has into generating high-paying, high-skill, high-wage jobs for Washington residents? So Aaron, if you want to talk a little bit about this slide, this is something that Aaron
Just to give you an idea, so when I was talking to you earlier about the pie, how big the pie is. The pie on the left you're seeing is the total state budget. And just where it kind of breaks down, you can see the government operations up 9%. The SHS is Department of Health, Social and Health Services. Public schools, that's your K-12. 42% of our budget goes right to K-12. Very little portion of natural resources. Corrections is probably that little piece down there that's little green slice. Now taking our slice out between higher ed and SPCTCs are the two-year colleges. The 34 community technical colleges. Higher ed budget is the second pie, and it's just how our system is broken down. So half the students
in higher education, roughly about 500,000 students are represented in that like pink slice of the pie. That's 34 colleges in that pink slice. We're a little less than half of the total higher ed budget. You can see how the others break down. The HEC board, HECD, is Higher Education Coordinating Board. The reason that slice of the pie is so large, that's your financial aid. That's for the state funding for financial aid, state fee grant, all the things that Mike was talking about. This is that slice. So this is just a little context to you to how that little slice is divvied up in comparison to all of the other things. So when we talk about all these other things are held constant and can't change as that pie is shrinking, our slice of the pie is smaller, and each of our little percentages will get much smaller over this next couple of years. A couple of things can I just add from the last slide?
Sure.
Am I going to interrupt you?
No, go ahead.
I think it was back to some of the questions earlier about, you had a question about the age cap for federal financial aid, 24. This is something that we are talking about at a national level on a regular basis. I think what you all have to realize is that we're up against a pretty ancient culture. Higher education was built on a foundation that, you graduated from high school, you went off to college for 4 years. It was a very traditional model that is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all for the students of today. And unfortunately, policy and funding is not keeping up with the radical change. Our two-year college system is moving now in a way that it wasn't 40 years ago. So a lot of that number that you see, those are the big policy questions that we are having to make a case for. Now, you eliminate that 24-year-old cap that's been set for quite a while, and you change that, the numbers change. And of course, that affects all the other pieces of the pie. So it's very hard to change policy, even though it makes complete sense. People are talking about it. That does not make sense. Our students are not being covered by their parents until they're 24. Many of them have been out and on their own for a long time. Why are we being penalized? The fact that you're independent and you're required to still be on your parents' tax return. They are talking about these issues at a federal level. It is important for you as students to make that message heard. They need to know that the non-traditional student is now the traditional student in higher education. So that's just it.
So just a couple of things to explain sort of why that last chart shows had our piece of the pie shrink so much. For public schools and the Department of Health and Human Services, whatever DSHS is, social and health services. So basically they have caseload. So when the legislature sits down and says, okay, well, how much money do we need to spend on these things? There are built-in increases that are needed in order to maintain services for those departments. So for example, the economy is getting worse. People don't have as much money. They may have had their kids in a private school or something like that. They say, well, I just can't afford tuition in a private school for my kids' elementary or whatever. I'm going to send her to public school. And that's an additional seat that needs to be that is filled now at the K through 12 level. And the state has a constitutional responsibility to maintain basic education. So that cost has to be increased. And same thing with factoring in how many students or how many children are foster children or how many people are in prison and all those things. There's a caseload forecast that's built in. There is no caseload forecast for financial aid. The legislature doesn't say, well, how many people are going to need help getting through college or how many people want to go to college right now. Megan, if you could go to the let's see here. This is, again, I haven't had an opportunity, Megan, Aaron suggested putting this here. So this is the students paying a greater share of the cost of higher education and state funding as a share of tuition. So